you doing? Thank you so much for joining with another math lesson with Mr. Worsford. Today, I'm looking forward to us diving into Unit 6, Lesson 6.2a. Now, 6.2 has a number of lessons that go along with it. I know, why didn't you just name it 6.3, 6.4, 6.5? Because they really revolve around this 6.2, and there's different ways to look at how to find a percent of a number. And I'm going to show you different techniques. I'm going to show you ones that I feel are my favorites. I'm going to show you things that quick ways to find percents of numbers just on top of your head and say, okay, that's this percent. Because not always you're going to have a calculator in your pocket. And I know that's a lie because we have our phones, right? But you're not always going to want to pull it out and try to calculate something. But if you know you're going to the store and it says 10% off and you're able to quickly calculate 10%, I think it'll make your experience in math, one, as well as with that store, a little bit friendlier and say, oh, all I'm going to pay for is this much. All right. Join me as we look onto the lesson. We're looking at 6.2a. Please join me with your packet. And as usual, take this moment, pause the video, and work on the bell work. We have 3 questions here. I want you to find the percent of these numbers using the technique we went over in the very last lesson of 6.2. All right, awesome. Let me go over with you. I'm hoping you had enough time to work on them. If not, always you can pause it again and keep working. But I want to go over it. Now, the quickest technique, I believe, to find percents of numbers is to take the percent and turn it into a decimal, right? You can remember we talked about 2 over 100. You could divide that and you would get 0.02. And take that now decimal and multiply it by 40, right? When you multiply it by 40, and let me just get my calculator because I actually didn't get a chance to finish calculating myself. Hold on one second. She doesn't need water. That's going to be 0.8. So this is really about 0.8 of 40. Okay. I'm going to quickly run through these. 0.16 multiplied by 12. Right, when we do that on our calculator, 0.16 times 12. And you remember I mentioned in the last lesson, you do need your calculator because it's going to help you a lot as we dive into these lessons. And then lastly, 8% of 8. Remember, that's 0.08. I think when it comes to 1-digit percents, I think you guys might get into the habit of trying to just move the decimal one time. Remember, you do need to move the decimal twice, okay? So what we end up getting is 0.08 multiplied by 8. And we get 0.64. Right? Now, these are all a portion of these numbers. Now, you're going to hear me talk about 3 things in this upcoming videos, and I want to mention them now. I think this is a good place to mention them. I mentioned it a little bit in the last lesson. Part, whole, percent. Part, whole, percent. Now, how does percents relate to proportional relationships? Let me explain something. Remember we talked about 2 fractions set equal to each other. So imagine 1/2 is equal to 2/4. You know this is a proportion because there's a fraction set equal to a fraction. There is a constant of 2, right? 2 divided by 1 is 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, right? But this is a proportion. Percentages also yield proportions in the sense that a percent over 100 is equal to something called part over whole. And I recommend you guys write this down on your worksheet, right? This is important. We are going to come back to this a lot, but I want to introduce it here. Because if you look at these 3 bell work, you'll notice that there's a part, there's a whole, and there's a percent, right? Part, whole, percent. I'm just going to identify them in the bell work before we dive into what we're doing. This is the percent. This is the whole, and let's call it W, and this is the part. So part is 0.8 of the whole 40, which is about 2%. Okay. Every single one of these has a part, a whole, and percent. Part, whole, percent. Percent, whole, part. Now, yes, we did turn the percent into a decimal, but we can always set it up as a proportion, and I'm going to do that in the future lesson of 6.2, but I want to introduce it here to you. You understand that these 3 components, percent, part, and whole, are essential. Now, the way that we find percents of numbers, don't get me wrong, I love this way. Turn a percent into a decimal, multiply it by the whole. We get the part. Great, okay? I want to talk about today something called quartiles and deciles, okay? Quartiles and deciles, right? What stands out when you hear decile? What stands out when you hear the word quartile? Those words should relate to you in the sense that the word quart or quarter is understanding something being divided by 4, whereas decile or decimal or any of those words with DEC in the beginning understands 10 of something, right? You'll notice that we're going to talk about quartiles and deciles. I'm going to show you how to quickly calculate quartiles of a number and deciles of a number, right? Mr. Weber, can I just turn the percent into a decimal and then multiply that by the whole? Of course you can. Absolutely, that works here too. But I want to teach you a way of quickly calculating it a little bit more on top of your head. If you look at the modeling, I'm going to go through 4 here, A, B, C, D for you. A and C are the same, B and D are similar. I want to start off with A. We're going to find the percentages of 56. Okay, 0%, 50%, 100%, 25%, and 75%. Now, these are numbers that I'm going to help you try to quickly calculate off the top of your head, which when you calculate on top of your head, you'll be able to say, oh, that makes sense. I could do that. So whenever you're in the store, you can easily say, okay, well, what is this number of that number? Starting off 0% of 56. 0% of any number means nothing of that number, which what is 0% of 56? 0. Nothing. Okay, nothing. Whereas the opposite is 100% of 56. So 100% of 56 is the entire number, which is 56. Okay, does that make sense to you so far? 100% of something is the entire thing. 0% of it is nothing of it. So 0% of any number is 0. 100% of that number is that number. 50% of 56, 50%, you and I should know 50% is another way of saying half, right? So if you want, you can get to the half and say, okay, let me just divide that by 2, right? Or you could take it as if you wanted to do 0.5 and multiply that by 56, that's fine too, right? But you would end up getting 28, which is half of 56. 28 is half of 56. Now, the next two is not as quick to come to the mind. But if you can visualize and understand the concepts I'm about to show you, you'll be able to get them as well. What is 25% of 56? 25% of 56. Well, 25% of 56 is another way of saying half of 50%. So what is half of 50%? 28. Half of 28 is 14. Did you catch that? I'll explain one more time. We know that 25% is 50% cut in half. So can't we also just take 28 and cut that in half to find 25%? Yes, we can. Now, 75% is a little bit different here. 75%, okay, what can I do? Well, I would think about 50% and 25%. If I add 50% money-wise, 50 cents plus 25 cents, 2 quarters plus 1 quarter, don't we get 3 quarters, 75 cents? We do. So can we do 50% plus 25% and get the number here? Of course we can. So when you add those two together, you end up getting 42. And just like that, we are done. Okay. Before I go on B, let's just knock out C. Why not? Let's do C. What is 0% of 176? 0% of any number we said was 0. What is 100% of 176? 176. What is 50% then, right? So 100% we know is 176. 0% is 1, 0% is 0, right? What is 50%? Now we remember 50% means to divide that number by 2. So on your calculator, you can say 176 divided by 2. We would get 88. So this is 88. What is 25% then? We know 25% is half of 50. So what is half of 88? That is 44. And lastly, 75%, we're going to add those two together. We're going to get 132. Excellent. Okay. At any moment, if you feel the need to pause the video, rewatch it, try to understand why I'm doing that, please do so. Okay. Once again, 0% means 0 of that number is nothing. Is nothing of that number. 100% means the entire number. 50% means half of that number. 25% means half of the half. And then 75% is a combination of 50% and 25% to give you 75%. Now, B and D are a little bit different because we're dealing with deciles. Okay. Deciles are multiples of 10. 10 times 2, 10 times 6, right? You'll notice 20%, 60%, 10 times 2, 10 times 6. So, Ms. Woodford, how can I figure this out off the top of my head without a calculator or without the need to turn it into a decimal and then multiply, right? And you can always check by turning 20%, 0.2, multiplying by 45. But I want to challenge you not to do that right away and see if you can learn a different way with me. To find the following percentages, I want to first find 10%. Every time you need to find a decile, I want you to think about, well, what is 10% of that number? Okay, what is 10% of that number? I'm going to go back. I apologize, it jumped ahead. What is 10% of 45? Now, 10% of 45 is me saying move the decimal one space. Move the decimal one space. Give me 1 second. Hold on. Let me just close the bathroom door for my children. All right, awesome. So what is 10% of 45? I would recommend when you deal about 10%, you move the decimal one space of that whole number, right? When you talk about 10%, it's really me saying 0.1 times 45. When you do that, 0.1 times 45, you'll get 4.5. So the quickest way to find 10% of that number, all honesty, is just move the decimal one space in. So 10% of 45 is 4.5. And you know what? Because this is a video to help you, why don't we take a quick detour? Let's take a quick detour because I want you to get better at this. So if I gave you random numbers, let's say I gave you 75. Sorry, that's meant to be 75. What is 10% of 75, right? 10% of 75 is 7.5. Good. What is 10% of 44? If you said 4.4, good. Remember, we're moving the decimal, which is over here. Moving that decimal one space n to get 10%. One space n. Let's keep going. Let's try a couple other ones. 10% of 138. If you said 13.8, you are correct. That is 10%. What about 10% of 8? If you said 0.8, you are correct. Okay, these are important for you to know. Calculating quickly 10% by just moving the decimal over is one of the techniques I use all the time. I use all the time when I'm going to the store. I'm not taking out pen. People ask me all the time, what is this going to equal? I quickly say, okay, what is 10% of that? As I find 10%, I multiply it by something else. And I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, so we know 10% of a number, we move it over one decimal space. So 10% of 45 is 4.5. Now, you should notice that we need to find 20% and 60%. My question to you is, okay, how do I go from 10% to 20%? What do I do in that case? To go from 10% to 20%, I'm going to multiply it by 2. Not 4.5, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to multiply, oh, matter of fact, I am. I apologize, right? I'm going to multiply 4.5 by 2. So let me say it again. To go from 10% to 20%, I'm going to multiply it by 2. I know that 10% is 4.5. So instead, what I can do here is say, okay, let me just multiply 4.5 by 2. And I'm so sorry. It's getting a little bit of glitching here. Let me just try to rotate it right back. Okay, perfect. And then let me move it right back up here. Right. So I'm going to take this, multiply by 2. So 10% times 2 gives me 20%. 4.5 times 2 is going to give me my answer here. So 4.5 times 2 is going to give me my answer. And that is going to be 9. Cool. Okay. 4.5 times 2 equals 9. Excellent. So 20% of 45 is 9. What about 60% then? Well, I would do 10% times 6. So 10% times 6 gives me 60%. So in other words, 4.5 multiplied by 6 is going to give me my answer here. Okay. And in that case, let me just double check my answer. I think I have an answer in my head, but I want to make sure it's 100% accurate. Yep. 27. Okay. So 27. Notice what we did. First thing we did is we calculated 10% of the number by just quickly moving the decimal one space. Then we said, okay, to go from 10% to 20%, what do we multiply by? 2. So take 4.5, which is 10%, multiply by 2, we got 20%. Multiply by 6, we got 60%. Let's go down to D quickly, okay? I want to figure out 10% of 75. That's going to be 7.5, right? You agree? So notice here, we already have 10%. Okay, so the answer here is very straightforward. We don't have to do anything more than just simply put the answer down here. So we know 10% is 7.5. But 30% is going to take out 7.5 and multiply by 3. Now, why 3? Because we know to go from 10% to 30%, we have to multiply by 3. 10 times 3 gives us 30. So 7.5 times 3 is going to give us what 30% of 75 actually is. And in this case, it's going to be 22.5. 22.5. Okay. So what we ended up doing, ladies and gentlemen, just now is we said, okay, given a number, a whole, we want to find these parts. We've given the percentages, we want to find the parts, right? We could turn these into decimals. Don't get me wrong. The technique we did yesterday or the day before is very well relevant. You could turn this into a decimal. 10% is decimal is 0.1. Multiply by 75, you're going to get 7.5. 30%, 0.3 times 75, you'll get it. But I want to teach you another technique to quickly calculate them in case you don't want to do that. So you're going to see in the matter of the second lesson here, 6.2, there's going to be 4 different techniques we're going to go over to find the part, okay? So that is what we're working on today, right? What I want you to do is work on the independent practice. If there's any questions at all, feel free to, put the message on Google Classroom, where I would love to help you guys. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining me.